revered elders, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Amnesty International and its civil society partners are deeply honored to have been invited to take part in this initiative that every human has rights. In exactly 1 year's time, we will be marking the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as we look back and as we look ahead, we have cause for both celebration and challenge. Celebration, as Mary said, of the impressive developments over 6 decades of an international human rights system, standards, laws, institutions that have improved the lives of many and that have inspired and continue to inspire all of us who struggle for equality and justice. But this is not a moment only for celebration, it is a moment also of challenge. And I think that is precisely what the elders are placing in front of us. The challenge of making rights real, the challenge of closing the gap between promise and performance. Around the world, human rights are being violated, ignored, eroded with audacity and impunity by governments, by big business, by armed groups. And as civil society members, it is our responsibility now to reinforce our commitment, to convert the rhetoric, to force the powerful to convert their rhetoric into reality, and to shift people's disillusionment and disappointment into hope and action. On this day last year, I was actually in the West Bank of the occupied territories. I was in a village called Jalous, speaking to farmers who have been separated from their land by a wall that is being built in defiance of international law. The day before, I had been in Gaza, listening to women and children who have no access to health care, of meeting people who are being impoverished under prison-like conditions, millions of people. And yet, the conference in Annapolis did not pay any attention to these human stories, to the human suffering that lies behind the conflict in the Middle East. And it is precisely those stories of human suffering and also of human courage that we must uncover in this coming year. The elders mentioned Darfur, and I know what they heard there is not just alive, but continuing even at this moment. I was there myself in 2004, and those same stories are being retold again and again by people who continue to suffer in the same way. World leaders wring their hands and yet are unable to ensure that there are a few helicopters on the ground that the UN and African Union peacekeeping troops can use to protect the people. But there are also voices on the front line of the human rights community in Zimbabwe. Amnesty International has just completed a mission of 4 weeks in that country, listening to these stories, documenting the stories of how human rights defenders and political opponents are being attacked, tortured, and thrown into prison with impunity. And tomorrow we will join a march with members of civil society here in South Africa to call upon the governments of this region to use their influence to bring an end to these violations. And there is, of course, the empty chair signifying the imprisonment, the detention of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, now in her 18th year of detention. We all watched the crimson-robed monks courageously march to protest the repression and impoverishment of their people. And we also watched the way in which they were brutally crushed. And civil society must not forget the struggle of the people of Myanmar. And we are determined to keep that struggle alive and on the conscience of the world until that conscience wakes up. In Pakistan, dark-suited lawyers who took to the streets to protest and call for the rule of law fared no better than the Burmese monks. Because like the Burmese junta, the Pakistani general also has powerful allies. And we, members of civil society, must remind those powerful governments that if they continue to prioritize political expediency over human rights, then they will aggravate both human rights problems as well as security problems. As Mary mentioned, a global strategy of counterterrorism, led by the world's most powerful government, has undermined fundamental principles of human rights. Ordinary people, civil society, parliamentarians, and judges, courts must renew their call for respect for human rights. It is only through human rights that we will gain greater security. That has been the lesson here in South Africa and remains the lesson around the world. And we must also, as civil society, draw attention to the hidden and forgotten human rights scandals. Very few people are aware that violence against women causes more casualties than the wars in the world today. While world leaders remind us of the threat of weapons of mass destruction, it is the sale and transfer of small arms and conventional weapons that is a greater threat, because it kills 1,000 people every day. And while the advantages and opportunities of economic globalization is trumpeted and advertised in many different ways, there is much less attention given to the marginalization of millions of people, to the impoverishment of women, the feminization of poverty. That more and more of the poor today happen to be women is indeed a blight on our conscience. There is growing awareness today of the dangers of global warming, but the human rights meltdown around the world today is no less a threat to the security and the future of humanity, and the call to action no less urgent. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights began as an initiative of governments, but today it is the common endeavor of people around the world. Every human has rights. That is the essence of our common humanity, and it places on each of us the duty to stand up, not just for our own rights, but for the rights of others. And that is the spirit of international solidarity. That is the true meaning of universal, indivisible rights. The Elders Initiative today is calling on all of us to rise up to our responsibilities as global citizens. And we have done it before. 1 million people put their faces on the campaign to control arms, and thanks to their effort, there is now in the United Nations an initiative to draft an arms trade treaty to control the trade of weapons that are used to commit human rights abuses. Millions of people have worked over the last few decades so that now the tide is in favor of the abolition of the death penalty. And so as citizens of the world, we certainly believe that human rights abuses everywhere are the concern of people everywhere. And we pledge to harness the power of individuals to galvanize action for justice and equality for all. We are outraged at the betrayal of our leaders, and we will hold them to account. We commit ourselves to creating a global culture in which every person can realize their human rights. And we will carry the message of hope of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to every region of the world in the 60th anniversary year with your support. And we will become hope mongers, trading in hope in this coming year, because we know that people power can change the face of the human rights landscape in the 21st century.